NVIDIA is replacing Intel in the Dow today, signaling a changing of the tech guards in the U.S. stock market. But more broadly, what can we expect from NVIDIA and the rest of the semiconductor sector as the markets brace for another Trump term in office? For more, bringing in our friend Stacey Rasgon, Managing Director and Senior Analyst at Bernstein. Stacey, it is great to see you. And we are trying to make sense of the new world, Stacey. When it comes to chips and what we are expecting under the second Trump presidency. Of course, he's talked about tariffs, but talked about them maybe as a negotiating tactic. One of the sectors, of course, that's been affected by this whole back and forth between the U.S. and China has been the chips. How are you thinking about this issue?
Yeah, like last time he was in office, there was a lot of volatility. It was tariffs and export control, all kinds of stuff, right? I mean, and I remember just waking up every morning and having to check Twitter to see what the policy of the day was. And so we'll probably have a return to that, I suppose. There's a number of areas where I think Trump is probably going to have an impact. One is certainly tariffs, and we can talk about the implications of those. One is the CHIPS Act, because it does sound like at least the Republicans maybe have a different vision for what that ought to be. And we clearly have companies now that are sort of scrambling to try to get their agreements, like under the current administration with the CHIPS Act, finalized before the change in the administration happens. So there's a lot of things that he can do beyond just sort of the general volatility around the economy and everything else, both in the U.S. and globally, that is likely to increase under a Trump administration.
It's interesting, Stacey, because I mean, listen, we're all sort of taking our best guesses here, but when I read the research from analysts who are paid to give advice about this sort of topics, the way they've kind of framed it is, well, Harris, she would have just basically followed Biden's approach to export controls, and that investors would have liked it, but they would have roughly understood it, and they would have considered it kind of manageable. These same analysts now think, well, actually, their bet would be that Trump advisors are in his ear pushing pretty hard for decoupling from China as a priority, kind of regardless of U.S. company impact. I mean, if that's the framework, what would that actually mean for your coverage universe?
Well, look, it's stuff like semis are one of the most global industries, right? So I think a full decoupling, like completely, is let's call it difficult. I mean, I'll hesitate to use the word impossible, but it's very, very difficult. But clearly, even from the first Trump term, like that was where they were trying to go. The actions that the Biden administration took, I would say, were more surgical, right? They went after specific things. They went after high-end AI chips. They went after semiconductor equipment for advanced logic and memory, but they weren't really trying to necessarily blow everything up, right? It was manageable. With Trump, I mean, look, he's more like a bull in a china shop. He could do all kinds of stuff. We've heard like the same thing you have, 60% tariffs on everything that comes from China. I mean, like it's clearly that would have massive implications both in and out of semis. I would say the tariff question, like just to isolate on that, like there's not a lot of direct impact for semis on tariffs. The actual trade in raw semiconductors between China and the U.S. is very, very small. It's only a few $1 billion out of a $500 or $600 billion industry. It's not that big. What you find is that most semiconductors travel between China and the U.S. inside other things, inside smartphones and PCs and TVs and cars and everything else. And so it's almost like a secondary kind of thing. Like if he puts massive tariffs on to make it up on smartphones and PCs, that's going to raise the price of those products in their end markets. And is that going to reduce demand? And that will certainly roll down to the semiconductors. But tariffs by themselves don't have much of a direct impact, just because we don't really import like raw chips from China. Only very, very small.